Deacon, when did you become interested in aviation?
Yeah, it was over the course of 4 days in 1987, and I was lifeguarding in Fort Worth, Texas, and a buddy invited me to go to an air show at Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth. So I went to an air show on a Sunday. On a Tuesday, after watching the planes fly and the jets fly, I think either the Thunderbirds or Blue Angels were performing. On a Tuesday, I stepped into a bookstore just because I like bookstores. And I saw a book by a guy named Richard Bach, who was an Air Guard fighter pilot who had a bestseller out called A Gift of Wings. And
Mm.
it's a book of short stories. And I picked it up and I read one short story called People Who Fly. And sounded interesting. But at the time, man, I'm living off of ramen noodles and macaroni and cheese. So learning to fly was not in my budget at all. So I kind of kept that in the back of my mind. And then 2 days later, or a day after that, the same friend invited me to go see a movie, and it was Top Gun. And I literally left the movie theater and walked into the recruiter's office. That's the exact same day. So I can point to the moment in the original Top Gun when I went, I think I want to go fly fighters. And I went walked in the recruiter's office and said just that. Hey, I want to fly fighters. And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, did you just walk out of Top? Did you just see Top Gun? I said, I did. And he said, I said, I want to fly fighters. He said, how much flying time do you have? I said, I've never flown a plane in my life. And he just rolled his eyes and said, this is a quote, dude, that's not how this works. So I said, well, do you have a test? I test pretty good. Do you have a test? And he set me up for a test. A couple of weeks later, went to the Air Force. That was a Navy recruiter. Went to Air Force recruiter. Same thing, same response. Same eye roll. Hey, give me a test. And I took the test, and I got accepted into both. Chose the Air Force, and like about 6 months later, I was flying jets. Uh, it was that quick, but it was literally that combination of an air show, Richard Bach's A Gift of Wings book, and and then seeing Top Gun was the tipping point, if you will. And
Amazing
that all
stuff.
was that was yeah, that was almost almost 40 years ago, I guess. Sure. So when I got accepted into the pilot training program, if you did not have a private pilot's license, the Air Force spent about 10 or 12 hours in a program called Flight Screening Program for Officer Trainees, called acronyms FISHPOT. And that was before officer training school. You would solo what the Air Force calls a T-41 Mescalero, what the rest of the world calls a Cessna 172.
Mhm.
And it's really just to see, number one, are you going to get airsick? And number two, can you learn at the pace, the rapid pace the Air Force syllabus requires?
Mm.
I'm a pretty large believer in almost anyone can learn how to fly an airplane, given enough time and money. But the Air Force syllabus is pretty fast paced. So I think I got 12 hours in the T-41 before I started officer training school. Then I did officer training school for about 3.5 months. And then I went to Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas. And that was at the time, you started in T-37 and then you went to the T-38. They didn't have it split like they do now.
Mhm.
So I spent probably 3 weeks in ground school, meteorology, jet engines, aerodynamics, aerospace physiology, and then you're in the T-37. You're flying your first jet.
Mm.
Uh, about 3 weeks after that, I think we spent about 90 hours in the T-37, or the Tweet as we called it, which is the great basic trainer, unpressurized, straight wing. Uh, Lands about 110 knots, something like that. You can spin it. We would go up and do spin sorties. So really great, forgiving airplane for basic training. And then you go to the T-38, which is where you start to differentiate a lot of folks, because T-38, everything's happening a
Mm.
lot faster. Instrument patterns, 250 knots, a no flap, heavyweight landing. You're on final at 190 knots. I mean, you can think about that. Someone who's got about 90 hours of flying time and suddenly flying 190 knots on final with little bitty wings, not particularly forgiving, a little bit underpowered. But man, it was, they called it the Talon, or some people call it the White Rocket. But you felt like somebody when you're flying T-38. and that was
Yeah.
about 6 months of that. 6 months, 90 hours in the T-38, somewhere around there. You graduate with about 190 hours, and then it was off to follow-on training.
So let's like jump into the OV-10. So, what were your first thoughts of the aircraft, and also what was the role of the jet or the aircraft at that time when you joined?
Yeah, so my first thoughts, we had a guy come by in an OV-10 not long after assignment night. So I went out to the flight line and at Lubbock at Reese Air Force Base and kind of climbed over, a lot bigger than I thought. It's
Hmm.
a twin tail, twin boom, counter rotating turboprop, but it's bigger than most people think. You can carry five, I think it's five paratroopers in the back cargo hold. We never
Wow.
did, but you could. You could put a mountain bike and a set of golf clubs, which I did do, in the back when you go cross country. So it was the
Uh-huh.
first thing I thought. Man, this is bigger than I thought. The cockpit looked like they just thrown. So it looked like someone had thrown up a bunch of dials and buttons and radios in it. Pretty antiquated. We call them steam driven round
Hmm.
dial cockpit. Very busy cockpit. Big kind of a big bubble dome canopy. Um, and his mission was forward air control, so marking targets. You know, the Air Force used it differently than the Marines. The Marines had a spotter in the back that did that. We flew it single pilot. We never put anyone in the back unless it was just for giggles. But in
Hmm.
combat, it was single pilot role, and it was just marking targets. Finding the targets, marking them with. We carried white phosphorus rockets. Uh, no kind of there's zero kind of sights on it other than just we call them iron sights. You can dial in some mils, and but it was more. You know what? I'm about 45 degrees away. I'll roll in, shoot a rocket, maybe shoot a second one if the first one looked great. We dropped practice bombs off of it at the range. It had sponsons for a 7.62 millimeter machine gun. We didn't fire that in the Air Force, but it had them on there, and it was a busy mission. A forward air control mission can be very busy when you're controlling a lot of air on a range, and it's an awful lot of responsibility for I was a second lieutenant out at Red Flag, out at Red Flag or Air Warrior, some of those exercises out of Las Vegas, and you're controlling the range, and clearing guys in and out, in hot, off hot, making sure the range is good. Uh, and no INS, no GPS, so it was looking at a clock in a map,
All
going,
right, old
okay,
school.
yeah, absolutely. Let's try not to fly into Area 51 because they're going to send me
Yeah.
home if I accidentally find my way into there. So only did it for a year, but man, I learned so much doing that because it was just so much. You're on your own. Here's the plane. Here's your mission. Go make it happen. Mostly single ship. In a fighter, you're almost always two ship, four ship, and for the first couple of years, you'll be a wingman for your flight lead. On the OV-10, it was here's the plane, here's your mission. Good luck. Don't screw it up.
Did you feel like when you went to the OV-10, did you think it was like a modern platform at the time or like right for the Air Force at the time?
It was on its way out. We all knew it was on its way out.
Hmm.
So it was a sunset system when I went to it, and it was replaced by the OA 10. Uh,
Hmm.
even at the base where I was, some of our guys stayed there and switched to the OA 10 at the time. Um, so we knew it was on its way out, but gosh, it was just as a young lieutenant, like I said, a lot of responsibility. There's also a lot of young lieutenants flying this airplane, and there was two squadrons. So, the officers' club on a Friday night was chaos because there was two OV-10 squadrons, three F-16 squadrons on base. That's an awful lot of egos all crammed into
Yeah.
one small building, and just a ton of fun. I look back on it as one of the highlights of my career.
Can you remember your first flight in the OV-10? That must have been incredible.
It was the downside. It was in Tucson, Arizona, at the replacement training unit, the RTU there. I guess it would have been 1990, summer of 1990. That was the year they closed Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix because their
Mm.
takeoff data did not support. It was so hot they didn't have takeoff data to support it. I remember it was 117 in Tucson.
Christ.
OV-10 was not air conditioned. I think we canceled if it got above I'm going to make this number up, but I think if it was above 112, we canceled. There
Ah,
was some number where it got this hot, we canceled. But you had this giant bubble canopy. It was just like being in a sauna.
yeah,
It had just a
greenhouse.
scoop air conditioner like a Cessna. Just push a scoop out in the airstream to cool off once you got to altitude. So, but what I remember, aside from being hot and just just sweating profusely, was the terrain around Tucson was fabulous, great for low levels. They had lots of ranges where you could shoot live, so we'd shoot, live Willie Pete's on targets, practice shooting, practice dropping bombs, practicing low level navigation. Uh, so I remember thinking what I thought a lot during my career is I just can't believe they're letting me do this, and
Mm,
and I think thankfully I really never lost that sense of I don't know if wonder is the right word for it, but certainly there was an understanding that better pilots than myself weren't getting to do what I was doing, and
mm,
it took a combination. Look, you had to have some talent to get fighter qualified, but you also had to have some luck and some timing. I know plenty of guys who better than me who, when they graduated, they didn't have tactical airplanes available for them,
mm.
and they end up flying maybe an airplane they wish they had opportunity wish they'd had the opportunities I had. So I was acutely aware all the time that I was really blessed to be in the position I was in, and
Yeah,
I think that's a,
absolutely.
that's a good that's a good that's a good knowledge to have. I think it'll keep you. It's hard to keep a young fighter pilot humble, but this kind of helped.
What would you say the strengths and weaknesses of the OV-10 were?
I would say the strength had a lot of loiter time. Now it wasn't going to get to the battlefield quickly. It seems like we cruised at 150, 160 knots. Had plenty of loiter time. Uh, it was, having two engines, of course, helps. Now, it wasn't armored to the extent that the A-10 is, so we're a
Mm,
little bit more susceptible to enemy fire. Um, and then there's also just a limit to how many white phosphorus rockets we could carry based upon fuel load, time on station, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a strength to going slow over close air support, right? Because you can see things a little bit more clearly.
mm.
But that strength, I think, also become a weakness as you're more susceptible to enemy fire when you've got an OV-10 passing over at 160 knots versus an OA-10 maybe at 300 knots or a fast FAC F-16 at 500 knots. So its strength could also be a weakness as well. And the OA-10
Mm.
was no doubt a huge upgrade in capabilities uh, and safety for that mission.
Yeah. So, like, obviously, on your first frontline squadron, what kind of flying would you be doing? Would you be flying every day?
Sure. So when I got to Shaw, it was right after Desert Storm had started. So we had, because we were forward air controllers, we were all attached to an Army unit. And so many of our pilots were gone without the planes overseas uh, with an Army unit as a ground forward air controller. So what that meant was lots of airplanes, not many pilots. So we flew a lot. I flew. I don't know if it sounds like a lot, but probably averaged 4 times a week on a
Wow.
5 day week. That's a lot of flying in the
Yeah.
tactical world. Uh, and mostly it was going out to local ranges. There was a bombing range right off the runway at Shaw Air Force Base. I forgot what it's called, but you take off, and 3 minutes later you'd be in the bombing pattern. You're going around the pattern with a four-ship, shooting Willie Pete rockets, dropping BDU-33s or practice bombs. We'd also go out to some ranges, and we would do what we called dry forward air controlling. So we would have maybe some A-10s from Myrtle Beach would take off, and we would practice talking their eyes onto targets, which we'd have to do if
Mm.
we didn't have, if you didn't have, or you were out of Willie Pete rockets. Again, no GPS, no INS. The days before that, those were ubiquitous. I don't know if the A-10s had probably an INS, but we would say, okay, we try to talk their eyes onto a target. Okay, you see that north-south hardball road there? All right, call that one unit. Look 2 units south of there. There's a small east-west road there, east-west road there with a farmhouse in the corner, and just get them progressively, big to small, talking them down into it. And once they can
Mm.
describe the target, you go, okay, you're cleared. You're cleared on a east-south run-in. and then you'd be in a position orbiting to keep an eye on things, make sure the run in is the right direction. And that was the vast preponderance of our sorties were either going to the range or doing dry casts with, some usually A-10s. All I did it with F-16s as well.
Mhm.
Did it with A-7 some, and then some just visual navigation. They go, okay, you got an OV-10 in 2 hours. Come back and just go do a low level around around
Mm.
South Carolina. Come back in one piece if you don't mind. I did. So Air Warrior is one exercise out of Las Vegas where you have, and that was where I think I faxed some A7s, Air Warrior, red flag. It's called the 70 series ranges of, look, and this has been 30 something years, so don't quote me, but just west of Dreamland, of Area 51, or the box, or the containers we call it, there were some live surface to air to surface ranges. So you might have the air war going on up a little bit further north. Meanwhile, I remember, again, looking at a 1 to 250 map, finding my way to those southern ranges, setting up the range, making contact with some A-10s. And so while the air war is going on up north, there'd be this, A-10s dropping live. A couple times had them dropping live bombs on some targets out there that I was marking with the white phosphorus rockets.
Mm.
And I would say, again, I was only at Shaw for a year. I probably did 1 2 week red flag and did one air warrior exercise. So I probably spent a month of that 1 year out at Vegas on 2 different exercises. Uh, they did not, Air Force OV-10s did not deploy to Desert Storm. Marine
Mm.
OV-10s did. In fact, I think there was one shut down, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think
But
I think I've
so
heard about that. Yeah.
yeah, we did live exercises. I don't believe the OV-10 went into combat in Desert Storm. Some great books about OV-10s in Vietnam. They did some fantastic work. I think it was around. I mean, I think it was February of 1991. I think somewhere around there. But I'm at Las Vegas, which you're going to learn is a trend here shortly. I'm at Las Vegas, single ship. It was one of those where, hey, here's your plane. You're going to go out, control air. We'll see you in a couple hours. Single ship out of Las Vegas, Air Warrior exercise, I believe, which is, and I think I was facking for some A7s. And these ranges are southwest of Las Vegas as opposed to the red flag ranges, which are generally northwest of Nellis Air Force Base. So I was out there in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and had some A7s dropping just practice bombs on some targets. And I remember again thinking, man, this is a blast as I'm marking targets and controlling the range. And after they've left, I'm just visually coming back home. And there's a Mount Charleston is in between the ranges that I was in and Las Vegas. And it seems like 20 miles about west of Mount Charleston, I had a engine fire on the number 2 engine with a visible fire. I put out the fire with whatever the checklist did, feathered the prop. Now an OV-10 single engine is not an overpowered airplane, so I began a descent, a gradual descent, because I was above the single engine service ceiling for the day, and I'm not sure if I'm going to make it over Mount Charleston, and if I'm not, I'm looking around. The closest landing field is a Nevada brothel that has a 3,000 foot strip in front of it. And if I can't make it over over Mount Charleston, then that's my plan. I'm going to turn around and we could easily land an OV-10 at 3,000 feet. We'd
Mm.
all done short field practices with you could reverse props and even without that you could land it easily at 3,000 feet. Just slam it on and get it stopped, no problem. So I get the fire out. I've got my hands full. It's busy. Get the fire to go out. I'm making some radio calls to it. There's another airplane, an OV-10, about 20 minutes ahead of me. I tried to get him on the radio. Never could make any contact, and I cross Mount Charleston by about 500 feet. So I make it over the mountain, and visibility is clear in a million. And I'm essentially on a long straight in to the east runway at McCarran Air Force Base. McCarran International Airport. I could go to Nellis, but I'd have to overfly the city of Las Vegas, and I don't know what's wrong with my airplane. I don't know why I had the fire. I've got some Willie Pete rockets on board, so some white phosphorus rockets on board, and some BDU-33, a couple of practice bombs still on board. So I've got some munitions. I
Mm.
don't really want to fly over the city of Las Vegas with these
Mm.
munitions. So my call sign was Mako. I don't remember the number, but it was Mako. So I finally get in touch with Nellis, McCarran Approach, declare an emergency and tell them I'm going to come land on their eastward runway. And they're not at all happy to have me show up like that. They're landing to the west. So I'm headed east. They're landing west. And they tell me that, hey, we're landing to the west. And I said, well, I'm landing to the east. They don't like that. Can you go to Nellis? They asked me. And I said, no, I don't want to overfly the city. And I'm closer to McCarran. About 30 miles out, they asked me again, can I land to the west? And again, I say no. And they give me holding instructions. Hold west of the runway, 10-mile legs, right turns. And I just went, no. I'm landing and landing to the east, and here I come. So get ready. At some point I called the tower at Nellis to tell them, just to give them a heads up. Hey, this is Mako. I've had an engine fire. It's out. I'm going to land at McCarran. I'll call you on the ground. So I've made that contact so that they're not wondering where I'm going, what I'm doing. And then maybe 10 miles out, they asked me, McCarran says, can you take runway 01 or do you have to have 07? And I said, no, I want 07. And then I came back and I said, say winds. Because now I go, well, I'm on a straight in. I got a big, 10,000 foot runway, 300 feet wide in front of me. That's where I'm going to land. But they want me, they really like me off that runway. So I said, say winds. And what they came back with was this phrase, okay, into 07, meaning, okay, you're landing on runway 07, right? But what I thought they said was because I just asked for the winds, I thought they said winds are 120 at 7. Negligible. In other words, there's not any winds. So I just continued on to runway 7. About the time I crossed the threshold, maybe it's 70 feet or something like that, I dropped the gear. Now remember, I have a big crab in because I've got a turboprop feathered engine out here on my right side. So that already introduces a pretty good, healthy crab, right? But at the time I crossed the threshold, I dropped the gear because when you lower your gear in an OV-10 single engine at that pressure altitude, at that temperature, you're going to land. So I dropped the gear when I was ready to land and immediately went wing low into the wind, So, and pretty soon, within seconds, I've got full left rudder, full opposite aileron, and I am drifting off the center line. Okay. And I realized I'm not going to land on the runway. So I landed in a ditch on the south side of McCarran Airport, and that ditch is a pretty healthy ditch. And the left tire came off, and that caused a stub. Oh yeah, that caused a stub. So now I turn, and I'm sliding across the infield. Now it's away from the terminal because I'm on the south runway, so I'm headed. Not going to hit anybody, but I see another ditch coming up. The OV-10 had a good seat. Had a Martin Baker seat, which has been getting a lot of attention lately.
Oh yeah.
After had a Martin Baker 00 seat. Mm-hmm. But an ejection's a million miracles, especially on the ground.
Yeah.
So I saw this other ditch coming up, and I put my hands on the ejection seat, and I remember thinking, and then I didn't eject, and I hit this other ditch that knocked the gear off. Knocked the bomb racks off. I went up on a wing, like I thought it was going to tump over kind of thing. And then it came back down, settled down very hard, as you can imagine. And I kind of look around, and first thing I think is, okay, I'm alive, which was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah. And
then I see the flames, and it's on fire. The plane is on fire. So I open the canopy, run away bravely. Already cars are stopped on whatever the street there is south of the airport. And I remember, oddly enough, I remember taking off my helmet to look less conspicuous, right? While everyone's sitting there looking at this, they probably put two and two together. Let's see. Here's a
Yeah, yeah,
pilot. Here's a burning airplane. I bet
yeah.
there's some correlation there. Uh, the ambulance came out, as you can imagine. They'd already been called because I declared an emergency. They came out and they saw me and they said, "Well, we thought we were gonna pry a corpse out of that thing." And I go, "Nope, I'm
Oh,
fine." And they said, "Well, we need to check you out." So they took me to the ambulance. They put a blood pressure cuff on. They start checking, and the guy like looks at the reading and he shakes his head and goes, "That can't be right." He does it again, and he says, "Your blood pressure is 220 over 140." I said, "Well, give me a minute."
wow.
I said, "It will go down. I promise you. I just landed that airplane that's on fire. It will go down after this." Not long after that, a couple of minutes later, I heard the unmistakable sound of a large airplane go around a DC-10 on a short final. I had to go around because the airport manager was crossing the runway without permission, without
Wow.
clearance. So he crossed in front of a DC-10. So it goes around. I mean, it's chaos. Cats and dogs living together. Just
Christ.
that planes going around, burning airplane on the south side of the runway, and I got on his phone. He had no kidding, a phone with a cord on it attached to his car. And I called the squadron back at Nellis to let them know I was fine. But what I discovered was when I called the tower, when I hit the ground and started sliding across the infield, McCarran Tower called Nellis Tower and said, "Hey, Mako 81 just crashed on short final." And Nellis asked them, did the pilot eject? They said no. So that now Nellis Tower calls my squadron and says
Mm.
Mako 81 crashed and he didn't eject. He didn't get out. So that turns into the squadron commander calling all the squadron pilots in, including my roommate, and going, "Deacon just crashed. He didn't eject. We think he didn't survive." So
Mm.
that meeting is going on, right? So if you know the standard jokes about fighter squadrons, now they're deciding who gets my stereo and who's going to call my girlfriend.
Mhm.
Uh, and while that conversation is going on, I'm on the airport manager's phone. I call the squadron, and a very somber sounding captain answers, whose call sign was Preacher. He goes, I go, "Hey, I need to speak to Willie Pete," who was a guy I'd been out with the night before. "Hey, guy, I need to speak to Willie Pete." And he goes, "Who is this?" I go, "This is Deacon." He goes, "Wait a minute. We heard you were dead." I go, "No, I'm fine." But yeah, where'd you hear that?
Absolutely fine.
That's when
Yeah.
I learned. That's what I learned. They all thought I was dead.
Wow.
So uh, it turns out the winds that day were actually direct north, directly out of the north, 25. I think it's 25 gust 30, which is outside of limits for an OV-10 with two engines, much less single engine. So that plane was not going to stay on that runway.
Yeah.
But didn't learn that for a while. Went through the mishap board, and they're pointing fingers at me and everything else. And it was actually this old crusty, believe he was a POW in Vietnam named Dickie Vaughn, who figured out, because initially Nellis Tower said, "Well, the winds weren't that strong at the time. Here's the reading," and what Dickie Vaughn figured out was they were looking at, because they were landing to the west. They were looking
Mhm.
at readings from the east side of the airport, because I was landing to the east. My winds were on the west side of the airport, and when they looked at the winds from the west side, they were indeed out of
Mm.
limits for an OV-10. I would have never figured it out. Dickie Vaughn, God love him. I think he passed away several years ago, but he was just pretty sure a POW in Vietnam, a major in our squadron, doing safety stuff, and he's the one that figured all that out months and months after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, Christ, what a story, Deacon. Jesus Christ.
It was it was a handful. It was a
Yeah.
handful. Uh, the good news is I was flying again. Had a couple of days in safety board, and I remember my flight commander says, "Well, when do you want to fly again?" He said, "We're thinking maybe beginning of March, or it was like 3 weeks." I go, "Well, what's wrong with tomorrow?
Yeah.
Let's
Get straight in there.
let's
Yeah.
go." Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
I'm ready to go back up,
Yeah.
and we did.
Absolutely.
Ended up flying again a couple of days later, and it went on from there.
How many hours did you get on the OV-10, and did you enjoy your time there? Apart from that, obviously, that story. Maybe you enjoyed that story.
Right.
I don't know.
So I got almost exactly 300 hours in the OV-10 in a year, which is a lot of time in a year in a tactical aircraft. I also deployed to Desert Storm on the ground for 3 months. So really, I got 300 hours in 9 months because I did spend 3 months on the ground with the Army. To be clear, I got there during Desert Storm, but after the ground war had ended. My only danger was going to die of heat, stroke, living in
Yeah.
living in the Iraqi desert. So 300 hours in 9 months. That's a lot of flying. Like I said, it was a lot of tactical aviation going on at Shaw Air Force Base at the time. So that was a blast. A lot of red flags, air warriors. Those are always great training, and just again, I've said it, the responsibility that they allowed young lieutenants to have managing a range was fabulous. Remains one of the highlights of my career.